All right, Angela, I have a quiz for you to start off.
Oh, no, you didn't give me a disclaimer for
I
this.
did not. No, I didn't.
I
which
guess
makes
it
more
wouldn't,
fun.
yeah, it would a pop quiz.
So, and I'm going to make it a true quiz because you already know what the topic is.
Yeah.
So, our topic is muskrats.
Okay.
And so, here is
True.
my quiz for you. True. How are muskrats connected to deserts, even though they're a wetland creature? And bonus points if you know their connection to the Black Plague in Europe. And the song Ring Around the Rosie.
Okay, well, that's like three questions
I
in
know.
one.
Let's see. It's all kind of connected.
You said they're connected to the song?
Yeah, Ring Around the Rosie.
Ring Around the Rosie. Deserts. I think you should buzz me. I don't know.
All right. Well,
You
maybe.
said these would be true or false.
I never said they'd be true or false. I said I had a quiz,
Oh.
pop quiz.
False.
Are you getting flashbacks to like 5th grade Friday?
Yeah.
You think you're free, and the teacher's like, pop quiz, spelling test.
I fail.
All
I don't
right.
know. I don't know. I don't know any of these.
Well, let's give our listeners a chance to think about it and see if they can figure it out. And when we come back, we'll go over the answers.
Welcome to The Wandering Naturalist, a Three Rivers Park District podcast. I'm Angela, she, her, a wildlife biologist with Three Rivers Park District.
And I'm Brandon, he, him, an interpretive naturalist with Three Rivers Park District. Three Rivers Park District manages over 27,000 acres of parks on lands that are the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people in suburban Hennepin County and surrounding areas.
So join us as we wander from park to park and discuss your stories of the past, the nature in our present, and how they have shaped our parks.
Come wander with us,
The Wandering Naturalist.
All right, so I particularly like this fact. I am going to admit it's a very loose connection, but when we think of muskrats, we often think of them as being like the little brother of the beaver, right?
Yeah, the beaver kind of gets the spotlight and more
and they have
attention.
a similar life habitat, but muskrats and beavers are actually, they're both rodents. They're not in the same families. Muskrats are a lot more closely related to lemmings, and in that family are hamsters. Muskrats and hamsters, they're relatively close relatives in the rodent world, and hamsters prefer to live in dry areas like deserts.
I guess I never thought about where hamsters naturally live. I just think
They're just pets,
I
right?
worked at
Yeah.
a pet store, and I don't know why anyone has a hamster.
Old world savannas, deserts, things like that. The edge of deserts
Is
I
where
should say,
hamsters
is where
naturally
hamsters come from.
Okay.
And then we blame rats for the Black Plague, but more and more evidence is showing it was probably hamsters being imported into Europe that actually brought the fleas that caused the Black Plague. So hamsters are the cause for that.
Is this the connection to muskrats?
Yeah, like muskrats related to hamsters.
Well, this is like adjacent to
I
muskrats.
said it was a bit of a stretch, but it's still a connection. And do you get the Ring Around the Rosie connection now?
No, I don't.
So that's a song about the Black Plague.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So Ring Around the Rosie.
I failed that
that's
history.
The rings that people got when they got the Black Plague from the flea bites. Pockets full of posy. Before we knew about modern medicine, people
That's
didn't know
what
what
they
caused it.
used?
They thought smells caused the Black Plague, so they would stuff their pockets full of good-smelling flowers. Ashes has kind of changed from achoo, like sneezing, and then we all fall down as them dying.
It's a really depressing kids game.
Every single kid's song is really depressing
Well,
when you go
thank
into
you
it.
for that.
You're welcome.
A ray of sunshine
I
around
know.
the plague and adjacent to muskrats. I think our listeners can probably relate to muskrats in other ways. I hope you can. Or maybe you're just maybe Zach is listening as a history buff, and maybe that's how he relates. But I do have fond memories. I lived by the Minnesota River for a period of time. And I remember seeing lots of muskrats, never really giving it much thought. But they were like neighborhood kids that were like throwing rocks and kind of harassing a muskrat.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember this thing like actually running back at them and like climbing up, and like he had to like kick it off.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, like I was impressed that this like little rodent was going after something much larger than it.
Mm-hmm.
And being sad that the kids were harassing it. I remember my brother and I going back and being like, that muskrat has a family. And didn't really think of muskrats again until I was a seasonal, and Stephen will know this story. We were trapping for muskrats. I think they were causing turf damage or something with their ground burrowing.
Yep.
So we'll get into that when we interview Stephen about nuisance wildlife and that balance of being a biologist in an urban setting. But getting to see a muskrat like up close in hand because they were trapped and just, killed ethically in a trap very quickly. And then Stephen was like, have you ever skinned a wildlife? And I had not.
Did you get the chance to?
I did. So the only animal I have ever skinned, and I think I did a pretty good job. We can ask Steven, but I even got like the whiskers and everything. It looked really nice.
Yeah.
I skinned a muskrat.
The only one I've ever skinned was a mink, which eats muskrats. So,
yes.
hey,
Say,
nice,
yeah.
fist bump.
We're connected. So maybe not the warm, fuzzy story that everyone was thinking, but I think when you get to be up close with animals like that, and that's where your curiosity can start in biology classes, and you get to like see their adaptations up close, it was an impactful moment. I will always remember it.
Yeah, that's, I think, why I started with that teaser, even though I admit it was a stretch. But I think for me, muskrats really are about connection. And I think the thing that I relate to is when I was a new naturalist at Wood Lake Nature Center in Richfield, over the winter, it really helped kids connect with how different subjects in school are connected. Because when we teach in school, we're often teaching one subject at a time. All right, this is reading time. All right, this is math time. All right, this is science time.
Yeah, different teachers, different rooms, very compartmentalized.
And there's reasons for that. It helps you, when you're learning multiplication, sometimes you just got to memorize it. It helps you to do that sort of thing. It also is a way we developed teaching after World War II to get us ready for factories. That specialization of labor kind of worked its way into our school systems. But I think one of the downsides to it is, how often in school did you ever say, when will I ever use that in real life?
All the time.
Right? And I think it's because we see it in its isolated form, not in its connected form to everything else. And so with the muskrats, what we would do is we'd take students who are learning multiplication outside into the cattail marsh, and they would have to find muskrat lodges. And then we had like an average for the number of muskrats that lived in each lodge, and they'd have to estimate the population on our marsh. And so they're using multiplication in the real world in conjunction with science, and they loved it. They wanted to go out, and it was like a treasure hunt finding the lodges. They were excited to do the multiplication because, I don't know about you, but I get asked all the time, how many of this particular animal lives in the park? People just want to know that. I'm always like, oh, I don't know. But the students got to figure that out for us and answer that question themselves, and it really made them understand why multiplication was important. It showed that connection between the subjects. And I think muskrats helped me do that with the students there, but they really they connect things in a lot of other ways as well. I've heard muskrats referred to as the bison of the wetlands because they connect all the living things there. They're bioengineers in that area, and they really have a huge impact on what plants are there, what animals live there. Muskrats, they have connections to intercontinental trade. They are even connected to food during World War II in food rations. It's really, really amazing to me how much, when you look at muskrats, they kind of leave ripples throughout our life and our history, just like the ripples they leave when they're swimming through the pond. And I know with woodpeckers, we talked about them being connected to everything, and now muskrats we are again, but...
They're like, you're just using this for everything.
Oh, but they're two animals where it just really, really applies, and I'm really excited to kind of see these connections now. We did it for woodpeckers last month. Now we're doing it for muskrats. So, to explore these ripples, you and I are going to spend the first episode talking about muskrats' connections to history, their connections between their unique adaptations that allow them to survive, and how those connections really influence the wetlands that they live in. For episode 2, Dr. Adam A. Allers from Kansas State University, whose research focuses on understanding how wildlife populations are impacted by environmental change, will be joining us to talk about what his research has found with muskrats. And then finally, our very own Stephen Hogg will talk to us in episode 3 about his own appreciation for muskrats and how Three Rivers Park District supports a variety of wetland wildlife with some complex issues. So, are you ready to give some muskrats some love?
Yes, I was hoping we'd be adding the muskrat love in sometime.
Are you ready to do the jitterbug?
What is the jitterbug reference
I don't know.
to?
That's the second line in the song. I've never actually heard the song, but I did look up the lyrics.
Oh, okay. I thought they were like two separate things.
No. It's like, I think the song is like, let's give muskrats some love as we do the jitterbug and explore something. I'm like, all right,
All right, everyone hit the wetlands doing the jitterbug.
You just ruined my nice transition, Angela. Thank you.
Anytime. That's what I'm here for. So where do you want to start? Because there's so many places. My head is swimming with all the things I learned about muskrats. And I want to give the caveat, like, there's a reason we're inviting our manager on to talk about muskrats, because mammals are not really my area.
Yeah, it has like 2 legs too few, right?
Yeah.
And it has lungs. There's no spiracles to breathe with.
I can't necessarily catch it in a net.
Well, you could.
If
you tried hard enough.
I don't think I'd want to. So I have learned a lot with this. So I'm hoping you're going to bring the history stuff. I've been learning about the adaptations, but my ecology is my background. So that's where I get really excited about any wildlife, when you start seeing its interactions with everything else. Where do you want to...
Connections are what get you excited?
Yes. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with some of the history?
I want to start with some of the history. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on it, but it is fascinating to me. The Voyager fur trade, we've talked briefly about it in the past, but it really was this connection between Europe and what we now call North America. Europeans would trade items that really could only be made in Europe, such as metal items that were finely crafted, copper pots, things like that, in exchange for things that they couldn't find in Europe, furs. Largely because they'd already hunted most of the fur-bearing animals in Europe to extinction. Mm-hmm. And so the most popular, most well-known fur are beavers. And beavers were loved because they're big. Their felt creates really good hats. And if you're somebody who is anybody in Europe between the 16 and early 1800s...
Fur was a big deal.
You had to have the beaver felt hat. You know, if you didn't have a beaver felt hat, it was like having an android. Who would even talk to you? So
my husband's listening right now. No, he's not,
I mean, the beaver fur hats, they were the iPhone of the time. That was a big driver for it. But just as beavers were hunted to almost extinction in Europe, where the fur trade expanded to in North America, beavers were hunted to almost extinction here as well. They became rarer and rarer. And so to take their place, muskrats became really popular.
And they're smaller, but
their fur is very similar. There's a lot more of them. And so they weren't worth as much, but they were still valued, and they could be used to make warm coats that were water resistant, mittens, things like that. Eventually, fur wasn't as popular. It switched to silk hats. That became the new iPhone. But muskrats are still really being trapped today. And at one point in the area that we live in now, where Three Rivers Parks are located, muskrat pelts were one of the main furs that were traded for, especially for the American Fur Company. So there's this history of muskrats being part of this huge intercontinental trade. Muskrats are still one of the most trapped fur-bearing animals today, though many trappers for a long time now have been raising alarms about declining muskrat populations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Another, I think, really fascinating connection to history is during World War II. During World War II, a lot of men were shipped over to Europe for the war. That had huge impacts on food production, industry production, all of that. And so there was a lot of food rations put in place in the country.
They were eating muskrats.
Yeah, one of the food rations was meat. And so the U.S. Department of the Interior created a cookbook just for muskrats to encourage people to eat muskrats.
How many recipes could possibly be in there? We need to look this up.
I actually have a link that I'm going to share with the social media team to the cookbook.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to try...
looked at it.
Legally, muskrat, and let us know how it tastes.
Legally, make sure you're...
I'd be curious how the recipes are.
I was reading a bit about this too, about how, because I guess I didn't realize that their meat was utilized, but that they didn't call it muskrat. Like they had, and I'm blanking on what the names were, but they like came up with other unique names because something about muskrat doesn't sound very appealing on a menu. So I'll be curious what these recipes are called. But it was like Chesapeake something. They came up with like clever names, and of course I'm blanking on them to make them sound more appetizing.
Well, and the title of the book itself is Recipes for Cooking Muskrat Meat. Wildlife Leaflet 229, Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Department of the Interior. There's fried muskrat, wine-fried muskrat. That sounds pretty good. Broiled marsh rabbit.
Oh, yes, I have heard them called marsh rabbit before.
Let's see here. Muskrat a la terrapin. The Michigan Special. Yes, there's a lot of good ones.
Oh, those are good.
Marsh hare a la Louisiana. I'm getting hungry. They were apparently something that was tried to use to help people who were still in the United States during World War II, so we had more food we could send to our soldiers that were fighting overseas. Those historical connections, I just find them really fascinating. So it's a small little animal that apparently had some big roles.
So to give some appreciation, we did do the beaver in a previous podcast episode. And so I'm curious about comparing some of the adaptations as well, because there are a lot of similarities. And one of my favorites is their fact about how their lips can close behind their teeth, which is the same for beaver.
Tell me more about that.
So it's, again, you can find pictures online to look at it, but their front incisors, again, when you mentioned that they're referred to as like the bison of the wetland, they're big grazers.
Yeah.
So a majority of their diet, like 95% of it is plant material, specifically things like cattails, reeds, but other emergent wetland plants, but cattails being the big one. So that's a lot of gnawing.
And they're often gnawing underwater, correct?
Correct.
Or they're digging up tubers underwater.
Yes, they'll eat the whole, like everything of the cattail they will eat. Those roots are especially, I think, yummy. I mean, think about it. They're in the water and they're nice and,
It's
moist.
like a potato.
Yeah. So when they're underwater, imagine if you were underwater trying to chew on something, you're going to get water in your mouth.
Well, and just think about like the leech swimming down and attaching to the inside of your throat.
Yeah, just lots of...
Yeah, it just sounds awful.
It would be difficult. So that's why beaver and muskrats, when they're foraging underwater, they can actually be doing that with their teeth and not get water down their throat.
Largely because there's a gap between their front incisors and their back molars, and that allows the lips to close behind their incisors so they can chew and carry and bring it back to a dry place to eat. And I think that leads to their teeth. They are rodents, so like all rodents, their incisors have open roots, which we've talked about again in past episodes, but it really just means that it grows their entire life. Our roots close off, our teeth become what they are, they kind of wear down, there's no regrowing. But for the incisors of muskrats, they'll grow their entire life and just keep on growing.
It's more like the front part too, isn't it? Like, so it creates a...
So my understanding is that we are used to enamel being over the entire tooth. That's really just how we are built, so we assume everybody's like that. And when our dentin gets exposed, the soft part of our tooth, it hurts. We're like, oh, that's awful. A lot of herbivores, including muskrats, they have exposed dentin, and they're made for that. And so the front of the incisors of the teeth of a muskrat are the hard enamel, and they're even orange because there's iron in there to make it even stronger.
I was going to say they're different colored than ours.
The back is the softer dentin, and so when the top and bottom incisors rub together, the enamel wears away at the dentin and creates a chisel-like self-sharpening tooth. And so that's what lets them cut through things so well and continue to cut through things without wearing down. Once they're ready to eat it, they've got flat molars in the back, and they grind up their food with those flat molars because they are mostly eating plants. As you said, 95% of their diet are aquatic plants.
Yeah, they will eat other animals, small percentage, but that could be things like snails, frogs. I've even seen like turtles, things like that. But for the most part, they're eating cattails as their biggest one. And it was interesting, again, to think of this whole bison thing, because I don't think people think of anything in a wetland being grazed. I don't know if that's like the whole water perception. Like people get weird when we move into water systems versus a terrestrial.
Because we can't see it.
Yeah, it's a terrestrial system. But these muskrats, their power of grazing and how much they consume really impacts those wetlands. And so when they're up down in the water, digging up, they're moving sediment, they're creating actual ways for other seeds and native plants to move in. So if you think of any cattails or even retention ponds along the metro area, and you look at them and they're just like solid cattails, think of what can live in that versus like a wetland that is patchy and open, right? Like some of those cattails have been browsed and removed even from the root, because again, these muskrats are eating all of it. That makes a huge difference in the dynamics of a wetland. So if you think of like a duck flying in, is a duck going to be able to fly in to a wetland completely enclosed with cattails?
It needs open water.
It needs open water.
And what I like is muskrats and the marsh kind of have this cycle that they go through. And so my understanding of it is that you'll get to this point where the cattails and really kind of get overgrown, and that's when muskrats will move in. And being rodents, they populate really quickly, they spread throughout it, and they'll start eating the cattails as well as a lot of the other aquatic plants there. And they'll eventually create a marsh that's about 50% plants and 50% open water. The plants provide food for a lot of animals, they provide nesting platforms. There are birds that need those marsh plants to live in, bitterns, things like that. And then the open water provides habitat for a lot of our ducks and other waterfowl.
So you're talking about their lodges, because I don't know that we've touched on that yet.
Yeah, so the lodges will be used as a nesting platform. absolutely. But just having those open spaces with the edge of the cattails.
For ducks and other things to dabble, eat.
And as I understand it, a marsh reaches its highest species density when muskrats are present and they've created about 50% plant, 50% open water habitat. And then eventually the muskrat population gets bigger and bigger. They eat a good chunk of the plants and the diversity starts to go down again. The muskrats leave and the cycle starts over.
Yeah.
But you're right. Their lodges are also something that is used by a lot of animals, especially I've seen geese use them for sure as nesting platforms. So do you want to talk about their lodges?
Yeah, different than a beaver. A beaver is sticks and twigs and woody stuff. A muskrat, again, is the same things that they're eating are the very same things that they're using to build these lodges. So essentially, they're just kind of building up like mud and then the vegetation on top of it, kind of angling it till it gets to like a big heap. They're not, again, as big as beaver lodges. And then it's underwater access as well. They can also do this in banks, so it's not just those lodges, as you would call them. But then they will also create push-ups. And I think we talked about that even in the beaver one, too, which is kind of interesting of like when they feed, they will push up because they're active all of winter. They don't. They will maybe cache some food, but for the most part, they're actively feeding throughout the winter. So then they will create these underwater tunnels in the mud to go from their lodge to their feeding areas, which would be what is called like a food cache or a push-up.
I would argue winter is probably a muskrat's favorite time to live because
there's not a lot of competition.
Not like competition, but also they're so protected. Their lodges get super hard from being frozen. They're safe under the ice.
And they're like 20, I think I was reading like inside in the winter, it's like 20 degrees Celsius warmer than the ambient air temperature outside. So they're staying pretty cozy.
As cold as the water is, it actually almost acts as a heater for their home, similar to beavers. The push-ups, as I understand it, when the ice is still thin, they'll start gnawing through the ice and they'll shove plants up there, hence the term push-up. And then they'll just keep adding plants and chewing the ice to keep it open all winter. And on particularly hard winters, apparently moose up in northern Minnesota and Canada have even been seen eating plants from these push-ups. So providing a food source for some animals. It gives them a place to catch their breath. Usually they're about 10 or 15 minutes away from any other push-up or lodge or feeding area, so because that's about as far as they can swim.
Yeah, well, I think they're holding their breath is typically like a few minutes, but they can go up to like 15, 17 minutes of holding their breath, and that's probably more of a tactic for like getting away from predators. Yeah, because again, they're feisty.
They are.
They're very feisty, but for their tactic for the most part is going to be to hide. And there was a video. I think it was on what was that show called? America Wilds or Wild America.
Omaha of
maybe, but it had video of like a mink, because you mentioned this, like minks are their top predator. There's been studies that show like a huge part of a mink's diet are muskrats. And so it was video of like a muskrat like just floating in the vegetation, like it just went completely like just so it blended right in, so it can like outlast its predator to just hang out under the water, hold its breath.
Yeah, they're very good at it. And they're holding their breath, they're swimming, but they are using those feeding huts and those push-ups to extend their range. They can find more food through the winter. Something that I found really interesting, the feeding huts, the push-ups, those allow oxygen into the water. And there's been studies
that'd be good for like fish kills.
Yeah, they've shown that muskrat presence can reduce the amount of winter kill of fish because the water can be more oxygenated.
Which is good for like a ton of other things, not just fish, inverts. And
another one of those connections. The other thing that I think is really fun is surviving in the cold, though they do it in the summer too. They have something special called heterothermy.
The loon.
Oh, I can't tell if the loon is just sitting up and flapping its wings like normal or if it's doing the jitterbug.
I think it's got a case of muskrat love.
Yeah, I think so.
So explain this word, because this was one that I never took animal physiology. It was one of those I was like, I'm going to take some more of the ecology or plants. Animal physiology was like whoosh over my head. So I'm guessing this is one of those things of how they regulate their body temperature.
Yeah, I love this because we're taught cold-blooded, warm-blooded as kids. And you can make all kinds of arguments about why that's not the correct terminology and all that. But basically, we're taught that there are animals that their temperature changes. It's determined by the environment around them. And then there are animals that make their own body heat, and it stays the same all the time. And it's so much more nuanced than that and so much more complicated. And so heterothermy is a what we would say warm-blooded, a more correct term is endotherm, creating your own body temperature. It's an adaptation to deal with temperature extremes so that they can either save energy or, be okay with heat. So basically, heterothermy is the ability to go from being a homeotherm. Homo means same, therm is temperature. So having the same body temperature like we do, to being able to shift their body temperature. That's where the hetero and heterothermy comes from. Hetero means different. And so they almost become what we think of as cold-blooded creatures because they're still making body heat, but they shift the amount of body heat they make in order to match the outside environment. And so when they're swimming underwater and it's really cold, they don't have to have their summer body temperature because that's going to take a lot more energy. They can survive with their body temperature being lowered far lower than humans could ever survive to adapt to that cold. And a lot of animals do this. We think about hummingbirds. They're known for doing it really well. When they're active, their body temperature goes really high.
Because they're going so fast, they can overheat.
And and they're just super energy. They have to have a metabolism that's really high. When they are not feeding and they're sitting still on a branch, their body temperature drops to save energy so they can go longer between feedings. Lots of desert mammals do this to deal with the heat. Their temperature can shift quite a bit.
Actually, it's cold at night, but really hot during the day.
And so it's just, one more addition to that traditional, your body temperature changes, your body temperature stays the same. It's a little bit more complicated.
Spectrum of a whole bunch of nuances. And what I've found fascinating, too, is to think like a muskrat's fur is really what helps it stay warm. It has two different types of furs. It has a top coat. How would you describe that? But they're like longer fur, and then underneath is what actually traps the water, which helps them float and be buoyant, but also traps that for heat. And then if you think about their feet and their tail, they don't have any hair there. They're almost scale-like. And from what I was understanding with this adaptation, too, is like in the summer when they're really overheating, they can dissipate heat through their feet and their tail. And then in the winter, those would be vulnerable to like frostbite, which you could see a muskrat without its tail. But they can, again, divert where they're putting their body heat to based on their body.
Yeah.
Their body parts.
And again, that's something we don't think of because we don't do it as much, though. It is the reason our hands get cold first when we're out in the cold is because our body's like, oh, it's cold. Got to keep the core warm. And so most of our blood flow then shifts to our internal organs in our trunk to help us survive. And then it's like, oh, my fingers are really cold.
So, yeah, we have something in common.
Do it too.
We have something in common with the muskrat.
Yeah. Muskrats, I don't know. I think that all these adaptations are just really, really cool, and they allow them to live in the marsh. They allow them to make habitat for lots of other animals. They're really an animal that just is connected to everything that's in there. When you look at a healthy marsh system, it's really because of the muskrats. There's a lot to it being healthy, obviously, but muskrats are one of the keystone species, one of the huge drivers. And they seem like they're abundant. They seem like they're everywhere. How often are you driving down, Interstate 94?
I was going to say about roadkill.
Yeah, but I'm thinking like I see the marshes or the lodges and all that. They seem like they're there, but muskrat populations have been declining for over 50 years now. Fur trappers were the first to notice and report this as muskrats are the most trapped fur bearer, and they were concerned. That's their livelihood. They want to make sure that they're doing well. And we haven't found one definitive cause for this decline, which I think because with all environmental problems, we always want to say this is what causes it.
It's multiple things.
Yeah, it's always multiple things. It's always more complicated than one thing.
Well, and you think about the history of wetlands and how we've treated wetlands from farming practices to, I think, again, it was looked at as like, oh, it's just cattails. It's just this one thing, or it's just, there's not a lot of diversity here. Like, let's just fill it in, farm it, build on it, do whatever. And so that can't be good for a muskrat that is depending on moving around and hopping from wetland to wetland to survive.
No, they've lost a lot of habitat. We'll often rebuild wetlands as a replacement for wetlands that we've filled in with new construction, but we don't really know everything that goes into a wetland, so it takes a long time for those rebuilt wetlands to start functioning correctly. They're often on the side of highways, so they end up with increased salt in the water because of road salts in the winter. Climate change appears to be having a big impact on them. Invasive cattails do. And so lots of different factors are probably tying into this. To help us understand these various environmental changes and how muskrats respond, we are joined by Dr. Allers from Kansas State University in our next episode to share more on his various research in the Allers Wildlife Lab.